The decision to become a teacher, to enter the education profession, now more than ever, is a decision to enter the political realm. I know that sounds a bit antithetical. That's because we think of the word political in terms of political parties, Republican versus Democrat, and ideologies, right versus left. But the word political refers to how we are governed, how people are governed, their social lives, their economic lives, and how their rights are protected. And for educators, how we are governed influences every aspect of our professional lives. To be sure, there never really was an idyllic time when teaching was apolitical. But if I'm honest with myself, there was a time when I didn't really think much about the political ramifications of teaching. While I've always thought a lot about politics and education policy, when I entered my elementary classroom, my focus was always on the children who shared the classroom community space with me. I had a reasonable amount of autonomy in selecting books to read to and with my students, and the methods I used to teach them to read, write, complete mathematical equations, and engage in social studies and science. But that is no longer the case. The education profession is governed. Every aspect is governed, and from the very top of the political realm. On April 3rd, the Trump administration issued a notice requiring all school districts to certify that they are ending diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI practices. The deadline for certifying their compliance with federal policies is April 24th, and failure to meet this deadline could result in loss of federal funding. And in fact, the Trump administration has announced that the state of Maine is losing its federal funding for K 12 schools because of their refusal to comply with the presidential decree that there are only two sexes, male and female, a dispute that originated from one small school district with one transgender athlete. And this stripping of federal funding and all its ramifications for students, families, teachers, and school administrators is just the beginning, because that is the point. Eliminating federal funding while shuttering the Federal Department of Education and privatizing public education across the nation, all under the guise of sending education governance back to the states, which is patently a false premise, since, as it is evident, states no longer have the freedom to decide how they want to address issues like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I recently decided to revisit Paulo Freire's book, Teachers as Cultural Workers: Letters to Those Who Dare to Teach, a book I first read a number of years ago. But this time, the book takes on new meaning for me. In this book, Freire examines the role of teachers within the political realm. In his seventh letter, he explains, as educators, we are politicians. We engage in politics when we educate. And if we dream about democracy, let us fight day and night for a school in which we talk to and with the learners so that, hearing them, we will be heard by them as well. Freire argues in his eighth letter for rigorous teacher preparation programs that promote scientific competence and teaches educators the importance of understanding the concrete world in which their students live, the culture in which their students' language, syntax, semantics, and accent are found in action, in which certain habits, likes, fears, desires are formed that are not necessarily easily accepted in teachers' own worlds. Inherent in Freire's discussion of education and democracy is his emphasis on freedom. In the United States, we cherish freedom and thus we revere democracy in that it ensures the freedom of all people, freedom to worship as we please, freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom to read the books we choose and make books available to students that feature diverse people and learn about their lives, beliefs, and cultures. In rereading Freire's Letters to Those Who Dare to Teach, I was struck by his discussion of prepackaged educational material at the beginning of his book. For me, as a literacy education professor and former literacy specialist, this was particularly noteworthy. I have for many years written about the problems inherent with prepackaged and often scripted reading programs that devalue the knowledge and expertise of teachers and disempower them to make instructional decisions for their students. Freire elucidated the most foundational problem with prepackaged curricula as a threat to educational freedom. He discusses the importance of the scientific preparation of teachers, a preparation informed by political clarity, the capacity of teachers, by the teacher's desire to learn, and by their constant and open curiosity, represents the best political tool in the defense of their interests and their rights. And I would add to that the interest and the rights of the students they teach. This type of teacher preparation offers the ingredients that represent real teacher empowerment. Empowerment includes, for example, according to Freire, teachers' refusal to blindly follow prepackaged educational materials produced by some experts in their offices to unequivocally demonstrate their authoritarianism, of their total lack of faith in the possibility that teachers can know and can also create. When teachers are required to implement prepackaged scripted curriculums, they enter the political sphere in what Freire calls a domesticated role as implementers of what those in dominant positions of power dictate as worthy of teaching, and just as critically, what methods to employ while teaching. I think it's important to remember that Freire was writing his letters in 1997, several years before the massive proliferation of policies governing reading instruction and the equally massive proliferation of reading programs that flooded classrooms after No Child Left Behind, and the imposition of standardized and high stakes tests that would become a common feature of educational practice. He believed that teachers' rejection of prepackaged teaching materials would result in the demythologizing, the authoritarianism of the teaching programs when teachers entered and taught in what he referred to as the intimacy of their world, which is also the world of their students, with the doors closed. But even then, Freire acknowledged the role of technology in monitoring teacher practice. Of course, 3 decades ago, technology was much more limited, and what he was referring to was the technology that enabled administrators to listen in on or watch teachers from their offices in order to ensure that teachers were implementing the curriculum with what we now call fidelity. Today, technology has infiltrated classrooms in ways Freire would probably not recognize. Students spend a great deal of time on computers and devices, and the monitoring of teacher practice is easily completed through programs in which every minute and every keystroke a student makes is recorded and graphed. And to one extent or another, prepackaged curriculums reflect the political whims of those in the upper reaches of the governing class because they are products that are bought and sold and their ability to exist is dependent on investors and hedge fund managers. It is a very profitable business for investors because they have a ready market of 50 million students across the United States. It behooves the curriculum manufacturers to follow the dictates of the governing class. We saw this in the No Child Left Behind era when every program marketed their educational materials as being aligned with No Child Left Behind content and methodologies. But in retrospect, while the use of prepackaged scripted programs was problematic on a number of levels, it was actually relatively benign in the larger scheme of things because it focused on phonics and phonemic awareness, the 26 letters and 44 phonemes in the English language. But now, under the Trump administration, the political realm in education is not in any way, shape, or form benign. I don't think it's a reach to anticipate that investors in the educational market will only fund the development of curricula that adheres to the dictums that eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, and teachers will be monitored increasingly to ensure that they aren't veering from the curriculum or reading books that are considered subversive because they feature characters that reflect the diverse students they teach. It will take courage on the part of teachers to truly put their students first, above the dictums of political ideology or the whims of the markets. In Freire's words, the teaching task is above all a professional task that requires constant intellectual rigor and stimulation of epistemological curiosity, of the capacity to love, of creativity, of scientific competence, and the rejection of scientific reductionism. The teaching task also requires the capacity to fight for freedom, without which the teaching task becomes meaningless.